Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Hello and welcome back, everybody. We have an amazing guest on today. This is actually somebody I have followed, sort of half known for a long time through a very, very close friend, Shala Nicely, who's been on the show quite a few times. And she connected me with Dr. Ashley Smith. And today we are talking about happiness and what makes a quote unquote good life, regardless of anxiety or of challenges you may be going through. Now, Dr. Ashley Smith is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's the co-founder of Peak Mind, which is the Center for Psychological Strength. She's a speaker, author, entrepreneur. She has her own TED Talk, which I think really shows how epic and skilled she is. And today we talk about how to be happy. What is happiness? How do you get there? Is it even attainable? What is the definition of happiness? Do we actually want it, or is it the goal, or is it not the goal? And I think that this is an episode I needed to hear so much. In fact, since hearing this episode as we recorded it, I basically changed quite a few things. And I will be honest with you, I didn't actually change things related to me, but I changed things in relation to how I parented my children. I realized midway through this episode that I was sort of pushing them into the hamster wheel of life. And Ashley really helped me to acknowledge and understand that it's not about success. It's not about winning the things. It's not about achievement so much. While they are very important, she talks about these specific things that science and research has shown to actually improve happiness. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to go right over to the show. Thank you, Dr. Ashley Smith, for coming on. For those who want to know more about her, click the links in the show notes. And I cannot wait to listen back to this with you all. Have a great day, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Ashley Smith. I'm so happy to have you here.
I am excited to be here today. I've wanted to be on your podcast for years, so thank you for this.
Same. Actually, we have like joint friends, and it's so good when you meet people through people that you trust. And I have actually followed you for a very long time. I'm very excited to have you on, particularly talking about what we're talking about. I think a topic we probably should visit more regularly here on the show. And so let's talk a little bit about, we had discussed like the idea of happiness and what makes a good life. So can you kind of give me a brief understanding about what that means or what your idea about that is?
Yeah, this is a topic that I love to talk about. And when I think about it, I have a little bit of a soapbox, which is that I think our approach to mental health is kind of broken. And I say that as someone who is a mental health practitioner, and I really love my job and I love working with people and helping. But what I mean by that is our traditional approach has been, let's reduce symptoms, let's kind of correct the stuff that's quote unquote wrong with someone, right? So when it comes to anxiety or depression, it's how do we reduce that? And that's great. Those are really important skills. But we've got this whole other side that I think we need to be focusing on. And that is the questions of how do we get more of the good stuff, right? More happiness, more well-being. How do we create lives that are worth living? And that's not the same as how do we get rid or reduce anxiety and depression. So in the field of psychology, there's this branch of it called positive psychology. And I stumbled on that 20 years ago as a grad student and thought, this is amazing. People are actually studying happiness. There's a science to this. And so I looked at happiness and optimism and social anxiety and depression and how those were all kind of connected. Fast forward, I don't know, 15 years or so. And then I really hit a point with my professional life and my personal life where I was recognizing, wait a minute, I need more, right? I need more as an individual. The clients I work with need more. How do we get more of this good stuff? So this is like the longest preamble to say, I did a deep dive into the science of happiness and learned a lot over the years. And I want to be really clear about a couple of things. When we talk about happiness, a lot of people think pleasure. I want good experiences. I want to enjoy this. And that's a part of it, right? This like positive emotion that we all call happiness or joy. But that's only a piece of it. And there's actually this whole backfiring process that can happen when we chase that, right? If I'm just chasing the next pleasant event, what that actually does is set me up to not have a happy life. So think about it. I mean, I love chocolate. And if I eat that unchecked, right, because it brings me pleasure, at some point it's going to take a toll on my health. And what does that actually do to my well-being and happiness? So what was really interesting getting into this area was it's not just this transient state of pleasure or enjoyment, but there are the other factors that contribute to a good life. And it's things like relationships. It's things like meaning and purpose. It's engagement. It's achievement, even. It's these things that are not always pleasant in the moment, but that really contribute to this sense of satisfaction with life or contentment with life. And I think that's really important that we need to be looking at what are the kind of the ingredients that really make a good life.
I love
Pause for a
this.
second.
I love a good recipe too. I like following recipes and ingredients. It's funny. I'm actually in the process of getting good at cooking, and I'm realizing for the first time in my life that following instructions and ingredients is actually a really important thing because I'm not that person. Okay. First of all, what is a good life? Let's just sort of, when I looked at that, I actually put it in like quote marks. Like, what is a good life? What do you think? You can kind of explain it. It's not chasing pleasure. We know that doesn't work, Otherwise you just buy a bunch of stuff you don't want and, behave in ways that isn't helpful. Not to also villainize pleasure. It's a great thing. But what would you describe as a good life?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's the million dollar question, right? Philosophers and scientists and religious leaders and all kinds of people have been trying to answer that question for eons. And I don't know that I have it nailed down. I think I'm humble enough to say I have my own ideas about it. And to me, what makes a good life, I think it's really when the way we spend our time lines up with what's important to us, right? When we're living in accordance with our values, to use some psych buzzwords, but when we're doing the things that really matter. I think also part of a good life is having daily rhythms and lifestyle habits that support us in as biological creatures, right? And I want to contrast that with the demands of modern life, which are that we should be productive 24/7, that we should be multitasking. People sacrifice sleep and movement and leisure time and stillness. And I think all of that compromises us. It impacts us on a neurological level. Our brains are part of our system. If we're not taking care of our system, they're not going to function optimally. That gets in the way of a good life. When we're sacrificing relationships, right? When I look at all of the research, when I look at my own experience, a huge component of a good life is having quality relationships, not quantity, quality, trusting ones that are full of belonging and acceptance, that are two-way support streets. Those are really important. And I think a lot of times modern life compromises that. We get pulled in all of these other directions.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So there's so many things. I also think that anxiety and depression pull us away from those things too, right? Like you're anxious or you're depressed. And so therefore you don't go to the thing like the party or the family event or the church service or the that's an interesting idea. So okay, I love this. Tell us about make this idea of meaning. Like, how do we
Yeah.
find meaning? I remember, I'll
Mhm.
just share with you a little bit of my own personal. I remember when I was actually going through a very difficult time with my chronic illness, and I know I was depressed at the time. And it was the
Mhm.
first time in my life where I started to have thoughts like, what's the point? Not that I was saying I was suicidal, but I was more
Mhm.
like, I just don't understand why am I doing all this, right? And I think that
Mhm.
that's common. So, what are your thoughts on this idea of the meaning behind in life?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to, that's a fantastic question. And I think, for me, I have a vision impairment. So I'm legally blind. It's a really rare thing and it's unpredictable. So I don't know how much sight I will lose. Ultimately, the doctors can't tell me. There's no treatment options. It's just I go along and every so often there's a shift and I see less. And for me, I kind of hit that same point you were talking about back in, I think, 2014 when I had to stop driving. And I was anxious and I would say depressed and really kind of wallowing in this. What does this mean for my life? I can't be independent. People aren't going to want to associate with me, right? Like personally or professionally when they see this flaw. So it was kind of a dark point. And for me, that's when I went back to the science of happiness, when I finally got tired of being stuck and I realized, my anxiety skills and my depression skills, they're helpful and I practice what I preach, but it wasn't enough. And that's really what propelled me back into this science of happiness, where I figured, what, someone has to have done this. And I did come across, this theory of well-being called the PERMA factors. And these are like the ingredients that we need. And I'm getting back to that because the M in this is meaning. So with this, the PERMA factors, P is positive emotion. That's the pleasure, the joy, the happiness. Cool. I know some strategies for boosting that. E is engagement. Are you really involved and engaged in what you're doing? Are you present? Are you hitting that state of flow? R is the relationships. A, skipping ahead, is achievement. But M is this meaning. And it's a hard one to kind of figure out, right? Like I remember then, this started what I was calling my blind quest for happiness, where I started to think about what do I need to do? How do I experiment? How do I live a happy life despite these cards I've been dealt, right? We don't get to choose them. You've got a chronic illness. I have a vision impairment. Listeners have anxiety and depression. And we get these cards, right? Like I think of it, if life is a poker game, we don't get to choose the cards we're dealt, but by golly, we get to choose how to play them. And that's important. And I think a lot of times people can turn adversity into meaning. For me, I'm now at a point where it's not that I don't care about my vision. It's just I've really accepted it. It is what it is. It's going to do what it's going to do. And I'm focusing on the things I can control. And that has given me a sense of meaning. I want to help other people live better lives. I want to help other people crack the code of how our brains work against us and how do we play our cards well. So if we go to all of this, meaning is really just finding something that's bigger than you are. Finding something to pursue or contribute to that's bigger than you. And I think when we look at anxiety and depression, the nature of those experiences is that they make us very self-involved. And I don't mean that, people with anxiety and depression, in my experience, have giant hearts,
Yeah.
tons of empathy, but it locks our thinking into our experience and what's going
Mhm.
on in these unhelpful thoughts. When we can connect with something bigger than us, it gets us outside of that.
Yeah.
Right. So, in saying, if I go back to grad school, writing my dissertation was decidedly not a fun experience. Would I do it again? Yes, because it was worth it on this path to my reason for being, right? Helping people live better lives. And so sometimes I think when we have this meaning, this purpose, this greater good, it helps us endure the things that I want to say suck, but like
Yeah.
that
You
suck,
can
right?
say
The things
tough.
that are
You
hard
can say tough.
or yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think when we have that, and that's where it's not just about how do I get rid of anxiety or depression, or sometimes we can't, right? Chronic health conditions. Anxiety is chronic. My vision is chronic. I'm not getting rid of this, but how do I live a good life despite that? And I think there are a ton of examples throughout history and currently of people doing amazing things despite some hardship.
Yeah. I love this idea. It's funny you talk about being outside yourself. When I'm at I'm having a bad day, I usually go, there's 10 minutes drive from us is a lookout that looks over Los Angeles. And for me, getting that perspective is if let's say I'm having a day where I'm in my head only looking at my problems and then I see LA, I'm like, oh, honey, there is a whole world out there that you haven't thought about. And I'm not saying that I'm saying that in a critical way of just it gives me perspective, right?
Yeah. And I think that's so important, right? To realize there's so much more. And when that does kind of shrink our problems, all of a sudden it's manageable.
Right, right. So just one more question about meaning is, what about, we're talking, I'm guessing more about people finding what's your why and so forth. What would you encourage for people who are very unhappy, have been chasing this idea of reducing anxiety, reducing depression, chasing pleasure, and feeling very stuck between those? What would you say to them in terms of and let's say they're like, I really have no idea what my meaning is. What would be your advice to start that process?
Yeah. Experimentation. So I think experimenting is a lifestyle that I wish everyone would adopt, because what happens is we want to think, right? We are thinkers. That's what our minds were designed to do. And that's awesome. And sometimes it's really helpful, but I don't think we're going to think our way into passion or meaning or a good life. And so I think we have to start trying things. And what will happen, if you notice, is your mind's going to have a lot of commentary. It's going to say that's dumb. That's not going to work. Who are you to try that? People like you can't do that. It's all just noise that if we look at what is it doing, it's keeping you stuck. So with experimentation, I'm just a big fan of go try it. Whether you think it's going to work or not, you don't know. And we want to trust our experience, not what our mind tells us, right? Trust your actual experience. So, for me, I remember getting my first self-help book was actually called Go Find Your Passionate Purpose, because I was kind of at this crossroads. I had been doing anxiety work for a long time, had kind of plateaued and was feeling a little bored. And that coincided with the stopping driving. So my whole personal world was just in disarray. And I was like, I'm going to go hike part of the Appalachian Trail while I can, right? And while I do that, I'm going to find my purpose in life. I did not find it, but it was an experiment, right? So I go and I get this experience and I can say, okay, I'm not going to be someone who does a 6-month hike. I made it 4 days. Awesome. But go and experiment with things, right? I never thought that I would really want to write. And I started a blog, and that has turned out to be such a positive experience. And prior to that, my writing experience had been very academic, where it was a chore. And now this is something I really enjoy. Or talking to people. So I would say experiment and continue to seek out those new experiences. One, seeking out new experiences helps on the anxiety side because you're continually putting yourself into uncertain and new. So your confidence level is going to grow. Your tolerance for not knowing grows, and your tolerance for awkward grows. So that's my plug for go try new things, period. And somewhere along the way, you're going to find something that sparks an interest, or that sparks this sense of, yeah, this is me. And notice that, right? So we need to, I know you talk a lot about mindfulness. We need to notice, what was my actual experience? Not what did my head tell me? What did I actually feel? And keep experimenting until you find something.
Right.
And I think that's really the key.
I love that you said your tolerance for awkwardness. I think that is a big piece of the work, because it is it is a big piece. We talk about tolerating discomfort, tolerating uncertainty, but I think that's a very key point, is we do have to, especially when it comes to relationships, which I know is one of the factors, is tolerate the awkwardness is key.
Yeah. I think it's huge. So I've been seeking out new experiences since 2017. It was a random, this is going to be my New Year's Eve, my New Year's resolution. It was such a transformational experience over the course of the year that I've just continued it. And I'm trying to get everybody to join me, because it is such a great, it's such an expansive practice, right? And I think it's great for anxiety and depression. It's great for humans. It's been great for me on this quest for a good life. But with this, it means I have put myself into some awkward situations on purpose. Sometimes I know going into it, sometimes I don't. I went to this one, it was called Naya, and it was, I practice yoga. That's cool. That's very much in my comfort zone. This was sort of yoga adjacent, but it was also interpretive dance with sound effects, and you had to make eye contact with people and dance in these weird ways. And I distinctly remember having this conversation with myself when I showed up of, what did you just get yourself into? And then it was immediately of, okay, you have two choices here. You can grit your teeth and hate the next hour, or you can embrace the awkward and dance at a 3. Because she said you can dance at a 1, itty bitty, at a 2, or at a 3 and really go for it. And that for me was my, all right, well, let's just do this. So I embraced the awkward. And that was a turning point. That was amazing, right? And then now when I think about good life, I feel like so many doors are opened because I'm not afraid of, this is going to be awkward. Like, yeah, it's going to be, and you're going to be okay, or it's going to make a hilarious story. So I think go for it.
And you're here to tell the story. I love it. You didn't die from awkwardness.
No.
No. Go tell me again, what was the P, the acronym?
Positive. It's positive emotions. So that is where that pleasure piece comes in.
So can you tell me about the P? What does the P, can you go through them and just give us a little bit more information? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love this theory because you can kind of think about it as like, how are my PERMA factors doing? And when you're low, raise them. And you know that those are the ingredients for a good life. So the P is positive emotion. So that is, we do need to spend time in positive emotional states, right? The more time we're in the positive emotional states, the better, compared to, say, the negative ones like anxiety or sadness or anger. Now, that said, we know if we try to only pursue pleasure, it's going to backfire, right? If I'm trying to avoid anxiety, I'm actually going to get more anxiety. But this is where behavioral activation comes in. Do things that are theoretically enjoyable and see if it puts you in a positive state.
Yeah.
So that can be, and things that are, again, theoretically enjoyable, because if you're in the throes of depression, nothing feels enjoyable. Do it anyways. And this is where experiment and then notice, did it bring on a pleasurable emotional state? Cool. We want to do those things. E is engagement. This is like when people talk about finding flow or being in the zone. These are the activities that you're fully engaged in it. Self-consciousness goes away. You lose track of time because you're just in it. And we know that the more consistently we are able to put ourselves in states of flow, the higher our well-being tends to be. So athletes will talk about this a lot when they're, on the field, they're in the zone. Musicians, artists, but there are other ways to do this. And this is a place for me personally, I didn't know. I was like, well, okay, great. I need E, I need engagement. What puts me in a state of flow? It took experimentation and noticing. For me, writing does it. Web design, I'm not techie, but when I start to do design projects, I get in that state of flow. And it has to be this perfect apex, this perfect joining of skill and pleasure, like enjoyment. So if it's too easy, you will not go into a state of flow. That's just the P. If it's too hard, we go into a state of stress or anxiety. So that's not flow. So we have to be like right on the cusp of our skill set. So it's hard work, but we're into it.
Right.
So that's the E. R is relationships. We need quality relationships where we are being open, where we are being vulnerable, we're really connecting with other people. And that is huge. I mean, if we look at what's the best predictor of life satisfaction, it's quality relationships. This also is doing things for other people. Altruism. Oh, I love this kind of side note. The acts of kindness thing hits on 3 different factors. So it feels good to do something good for other people. So if you want a mood boost, go do an act of kindness. That reliably boosts our mood. It also improves relationships, and it can tap into that meaning. So I love that as just a practice. The M we talked about, that's meaning. And then the A, that's achievement for achievement's sake. as humans, it feels good to conquer goals, right? It feels good to accomplish things. And that contributes to our well-being independently of the positive feelings that we get from it or the meaning in the relationships or the engagement. So I'm also a really big fan of set goals and then crush them. And it can be silly little things like I'm going to hold my breath for 2 minutes. Okay, cool. That's a silly little thing, but then it feels good to do it. Or it could be something huge like crossing those bucket list things
Yeah.
off your list.
You know what's funny around achievement? I've got a couple of questions, but first I want to tell you a story. Last year, I was struggling to do a couple of things that were really important to me for my medical health. And I found an app called Streaks. Have you heard of Streaks? It was like a $5 app. But when you do the action, and for me, it was taking my medicine. When I do the action, it sort of does this little spiral, and then it's like you've done this for 3 days in a row, and then tomorrow you click it, and then it says you've done it for 4 days in a row. And you would think that the benefits of taking my medicine would be enough, but for me, it's actually knowing I get that little positive reinforcement of like, look at me, I've taken my medicine for 47 days in a row, or now I like 300 days in a row. So I think
Right.
I think that even it doesn't have to be like, I don't think I deserve a medal for being able to take my medicine. But for me, that little bit of reward center on the achievement was a huge shift for me. And then it became, how many days did you spend practice your Spanish in a row? Or how many days, even like, how many days did you do your Kegels? Like, this is like, I've got all of the streaks happening. And it's really incredible how that little achievement piece does boost your mood.
Yeah. But what I love about this is you're also talking about how to hack the system, right? What we're talking about our brains. And this is the stuff that just lights me up is thinking about, because oftentimes our minds will say, well, you should just take your medication. You should just do these things. Well, that's not how it works. There's a million reasons why we don't do the things we know we should do. But can we figure out how to hack the system? Yeah, our brains love streaks. They love streaks. There's something that it taps our reward centers, right? So, like you're saying, and so let's use the tools that work, right? So that got you. If your goal is take your medication consistently, using our brain's kind of glitchy wiring to our own advantage is something that's huge. That did it, right? And then it does feel good. And then you get some momentum going, and then you create a habit around that. And it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about those who are overachieving to the point that it's bringing their happiness down? What would we do there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's something that comes up a lot, right? Especially when we look at anxiety and perfectionism. And I think it's, at least the way I kind of think about it, is coming back to what's driving this, right? Is this being driven by fear? Is this being driven by values? Right. And for me, I almost kind of think of it as this, I'm going to try to make sense with it. Is it the ing or the ed? Meaning like the doing, ing, or the like ed as in I did this past tense. What I mean by this is I notice for me when I'm approaching something, say big goal of, right, like I want to write a book this year. And if I can approach that from a place of, I am doing this because this is important to me, I feel driven to get this message out into the world, the ing, right? The process of doing it, that feels like it's going to boost my well-being. When I start to get pulled into the thoughts of the outcome, right? I'm going to write this book and how many people are going to read it? And is it going to sell? And I'm really kind of looking at all of this. And underneath that is fear. What if it doesn't sell? What if people judge it? What if they think it's stupid? Then I'm focusing on the outcome, kind of the when it's done. That I think is actually going to detract from my well-being because it's not coming from a valued place. It's coming from this feared place. So a lot of times with overachieving, we're kind of chasing this other people's expectations, or we're chasing this promise of happiness. When you do this, then you'll be happy. It's not going to work like that, right? Like it may be for a moment and then the bar just changes again. Now you've got another target. So we have to come back to this, I think, the process or the journey. And are you doing this because it matters to you? Are you doing this because some sort of fear is compelling you?
Right. So I remember, I'm just asking questions based on like the questions I would have had when I was struggling the most. And I remember hearing something that blew my mind. And I actually want your honest opinion about it,
Okay.
which is that I remember I used to chase happiness, like you talked about, even though I was doing all these things, right? Like I was doing all these things, but there was that sort of like anxious drive behind it. And I remember hearing somebody saying, life is 50-50. Even though you're doing all these things, you're still going to have 50% great and 50% hard. And for me, that was actually very relieving. It was like the pressure became off to, I think I was caught in, and I think a lot of people experience this on like, okay, I'm at 50%. How can I get to 55? How can I get to 56? How, like, so what are your thoughts on also accepting that you won't be happy all the time? Or what are your thoughts on balancing this this goal for happiness, or this sort of lifelong, playfulness around happiness?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think we have this sort of cultural myth that we should be happy all the time. So if you're not happy, there must be something wrong. You're doing
Right.
something wrong. And it sets up even this idea that being happy all the time is possible. And it isn't. If we look at, again, happiness being that sort of what people mean by that is pleasurable or enjoyable state, right? An emotion that we like. Humans are wired to, like, 2/3 of our emotions would be under that negative category. So just by the way we're wired, we're more likely to have negative emotions, right? They're just messengers. They're just designed to give us information about a situation. Some of them are going to be dangerous. So we're going to feel anxious, or we're going to lose something we care about. So we're going to be sad. We're going to mess up. So we're going to feel guilty, right? It's unrealistic to expect to not have those emotions. So I think that is 100% something that we need to work on, just accepting happiness all the time is not possible, and pursuing it is like playing a rigged game. The other thing, you know how on the anxiety side, we talk about facing fears because then you habituate or you get used to them, right? But that habituation process happens on the pleasurable side too. This is why when we chase happiness, we end up on this hedonic treadmill, is the term, where it's, oh, I'm going to go buy this thing, right? And then I'm going to feel really happy. And you are. And then you're going to habituate. Your body goes back to baseline. So that happiness fades. So if you're looking to an external source, you're going to get caught up in this always chasing something bigger and better, not sustainable. So I like to look at happiness as the side effect of living a good life. Do the things that we know matter. Take care of your health and well-being, sleep, eat well, move your body, practice mindfulness, the PERMA factors that we talked about, and live in line with your values. And if you're doing those things, happiness is sort of the side effect of that.
To make that the goal, not happiness the goal.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very true. And again, for me, it was a massive relief. I remember this like weight falling off of like, oh, because I think social media make it so easy to sort of assume that everyone's just happy, content,
Oh, yeah.
fulfilled, all the things. It was sort of delightful to be like, oh, no, everyone's got a 50-50.
Exactly. And then when we know that's normal, then all of a sudden you can accept it, right? Like,
Right.
I'm anxious for now. I'm sad for now. And to do that. And it does kind of keep us from piling on extra, right? I have this saying that I love of, just because life gives you a cactus doesn't mean you have to sit on it. And a lot of times we sit on it because we're ruminating, or I don't want to feel this way, and we're fighting it. And that's just amplifying it and making it a lot harder. And when we can say, like, oh, this is where I'm at today, I'm still going to choose to do the things that I know are good for me, that are part of me living a good life by my standards or my terms. That's going to be the side effect, is I'm going to end up with more happiness down the road, but not chasing it in that moment.
I love this. Thank you for coming on and talking about this. I think this has been enlightening and so joyful to have these conversations. I feel a little lighter even myself after chatting with you. So thank you. Tell
Awesome.
me how people can hear from you, get in touch with you, learn about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a blog that I publish every week. And so if you're interested in that, you can subscribe at peakmindpsychology.com/subscribe, or you can just check out all of the blog posts. And then that's probably the best way to follow me and follow my work. And I also have a TEDx talk that came out pretty recently, and you can watch that as well. It's called Is Your Brain Deceiving You? And I talk a little bit about learning to play my cards well.
I love the TED Talk. Congratulations on that. It was so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again for coming on. This has been just delightful. Really, it has.
I appreciate you having me.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.